This is, by any standards, an awful war. In the 5 years since I first came here, I've seen and filmed some terrible sights.
Still alive. Still alive. Still alive. Yeah.
These dead and injured women and children were members of Joseph Coyne's Lord's Resistance Army, who died in a battle with Ugandan government forces. Over the past 20 years, the LRA has abducted thousands of children and forced them to terrorize their own communities with acts of unspeakable brutality. Government forces too stand accused of acts of indiscriminate violence and abuse. But one of the most disturbing things about this war has been the attitude of the rest of the world. It seemed that as long as the LRA were stealing children rather than oil or minerals, no one anywhere else appeared to care. For now, though, the guns are mostly silent, and there is hope the war may end. But there's a problem.
The on-off peace negotiations have been deeply complicated by the intervention of a body whose very existence is to bring people like Joseph Coyne to justice, the International Criminal Court.
I've come back to Uganda to try and understand this fragile peace process and the hidden dangers of the West's new interest in this war. Kampala-based writer Frank Nyakairo is a close observer of the politics of this region.
I think right now we have a lull in fighting, but there's fear at the same time that Joseph Coyne right now has about 6 bases in northeastern Congo near the Sudan border, can spring back and fight. So there's that fear because the rebels are still out there.
These photographs taken by the LRA show them living and training in the bush and during their operations against the civilians of the north. But where once they just terrorized the people of the north, now they are seen as a threat to the interests of this whole African region and the interests of the West. And the key to understanding that is Sudan and its oil. Because during the civil war between North and South Sudan, Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir in Khartoum backed the LRA in exchange for their support in his war on the South.
When Southern Sudan government signed an agreement with the North in May 2005, there was a deliberate effort to try and remove most of the other elements that would destabilize Southern Sudan, which is very key to the West in terms of its oil interest in the Sudan.
But that's desperately cynical. For 20 years, nearly, Joseph Coyne has been kidnapping children by the thousands. And it's not until the area has become strategic because of the question of oil, because of the question of Southern Sudan, that's why the West is interested?
Absolutely, absolutely. Why are they picking interest now? Because LRA is beginning to be an international threat, a regional threat to interests of the West.
It's a 360-kilometre journey from Kampala to Gulu in the homeland of the Acholi people, and the area which has been a war zone for over 20 years.
Well, we've just crossed over the White Nile and entered the lands that, until relatively recently, lived in terror of the LRA. As if symbolically the clouds have opened. 4 years ago I would have been very, very frightened to be on this road at this time of night. But today it's safe for the time being. The LRA are a long way away to the northwest. Life here is beginning to return to some kind of normality.
These days, Gulu has the feeling of a town emerging at last from a protracted nightmare.
So hi, Bitek. It's good to see you.
Nice seeing you too.
Here we go.
Bitek Okech was born here and is now raising his own family. He's a local journalist who has become a friend and helped guide me through this war.
So Bitek, since I last saw you, you've had a baby.
Yeah. I have a baby girl. She was born into the relative peace. I don't think she has had the things to do with the gunshots or something like that.
So you must have hopes that she will never hear gunshot.
I very much pray that she lives in total peace. We have seen enough of what war brings.
Bitek warned that local people weren't taking the peace for granted.
They fear that the war can easily resume at any time. They see the current peace talk, as they see it as if it is something fragile. If it is not handled well, it may break. Joseph Kony was supposed to sign the peace agreement in April. He did not.
As long as that peace remains in the balance, hundreds of thousands of people will remain displaced from their homes.
Huge internally displaced people's camps like this one provided the desperate security of numbers, but they were dangerous, demoralizing, disease-ridden and subject to attack. But today, some people are beginning to return to their villages, though others remain out of fear that Coin may yet come back.
As well as creating the camps, this war forced thousands of children to make a desperate nightly pilgrimage into Gulu, where they would sleep on the streets to escape rebel attacks on their villages. I met one of them, a girl called Florence Akonyo, 5 years ago. She said then that her father had been killed by the LRA.
Whether I asked my mom, how have they killed my father? My mom don't want to tell me. She said that if she told me, I'm going to be crying every time.
Today, Florence is back in her village and living with her mum. 5 years ago, she also told me that 3 of her cousins had been abducted. So, had she heard any news of them since?
My cousins, 2 of them were boys, then 1 was a girl, and out of them, they abducted them in the evening. Then one of our cousins, she came back and she told us that the brothers are all been stoned and they cut even their necks. You imagine, they're all dead. Yet she was even there, and they told her that you also stoned these people, and she did it also.
Forcing kidnapped children to stone or beat their own siblings to death is a classic LRA technique, a process that initiates them and prepares them to commit further acts of grotesque barbarity as soldiers of the LRA. But Florence is clear what should happen to these brutalized soldiers.
Forgiveness is needed. If somebody did bad to you, you respond in a negative way, then the fighting will not end, it will just continue. Forgiveness is needed.
This notion of forgiveness is not something that Florence has snatched from nowhere. It has its roots in traditional Acholi culture. There are very few people in this area who have escaped the ravages of this war, and retired Anglican Bishop MacLeod Baker Ochola is no exception.
Our first daughter was picked from her house and gang raped by some of the rebels. And then after that terrible ordeal, she came and committed suicide by taking some chloroquine tablets, and she died. That was the first experience. It was very difficult for us as a family. After 10 years, my wife was blown to pieces by a landmine allegedly planted by the LRA. And that was another terrible experience for us. You know, I felt like a tree that has been split from top to bottom by lightning. Her tragic death has become a great challenge to me. And that's why I've dedicated my whole life to work for peace, so that other people may not go through the same experience as we went through. 2 is to forgive those who have done it to us, those who killed my daughter, those who killed my wife, those who killed many of my parishioners.
Can you forgive the people who did that?
Oh yes, I've already forgiven them. And honestly, I've forgiven them. You know, forgiveness comes from the heart of the offended community or offended person.
And in Acholi culture, there is a mechanism designed to achieve just that. Matoput is a traditional Acholi process of truth-telling, forgiveness and reconciliation, and very many Acholis believe it is the best way to rebuild their shattered society.
In the cultural justice system, the aim is to restore the broken relationship. The aim is to bring transformation to the two society, to break the cycle of violence so that life can be given to those people again and they can live in harmony and peace.
Florence Akonyo's mother must walk 10 kilometers to reach her fields. Until recently, the war made that impossible. But now, for the first time in years, she is planting crops.
How confident are you that the peace will last and that you'll be able to harvest these beans?
She's saying that she still don't know if there will be war soon. But if there's a war again, then she will not harvest this crop that she had planted.
But the question of whether the peace will hold has now been complicated by the belated intervention of a world that until recently seemed not to care.
What we're approaching here is Odek camp. It's one of the dozens of internally displaced people's camps scattered all over the north of Uganda. But what's particularly interesting about this camp is that it's very near to the birthplace and home of Joseph Coyne.
We met two young brothers who agreed to take Bitek and I into the bush to find Coyne's old compound.
This is the place where Joseph Coyne was born and raised. He grew up here. His brother was a primary school teacher. His hut stood where you can see some banana stems over there. The brother was killed by LRA rebel fighters.
His brother was killed by his own army?
Exactly.
Did your family know Joseph Coyne?
My father, no. But they all died, you know, the IDP camp at the time when the LRA rebel attacks on the IDP camp in the year 2004.
Your family were killed, your mother and
my mother and father.
What do you feel about the LRA?
They should come back home.
And you would welcome them home to your village?
I welcome them.
Why?
You know, forgiveness is better than revenge. So we forgive them.
Even though they killed your mother and your father?
I forgive them because we want peace.
That willingness to forgive is everywhere in Acholi land. Partly it's a product of traditional culture, partly a product of the fact that so many of the LRA are their own children, and partly out of sheer war weariness. But can forgiveness bring peace or justice? Today, Joseph Coyne's army is in the bush in Congo, near the border with Sudan, but significant regional and international events are beginning to bear on what happens next.
Not least of these is that the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants against Coyne and 4 of his lieutenants. These have massively increased Coyne's paranoia, and he fears he'll be seized as soon as he shows his face. He's given that as the reason for constantly postponing the signing of the long-awaited peace deal.
And this has caused anguish to the war-weary people of the north.
Our people, those who are so much affected by war, are completely against the ICC system. The ICC came at the wrong time. At a time when people are so much hoping that peace talk will succeed. To our people here, they see the coming in of the ICC to be very close to a kind of a sabotage.
Sabotage of the
Yes.
peace process.
See that? Why not wait? We have the peace, then you get your time, and you pick Joseph Kony, you take him.
The Ugandan government, which first invited the ICC in, now wants it to back off. Many Ugandans are also asking how the ICC can investigate the crimes of the LRA, but not the crimes by government forces. And to many people in the north, it feels that the world, having ignored them for so long, is now standing in the way of their peace. Or even worse, doesn't regard their system of justice as good enough.
The ICC has become a stumbling block in the peace process. People really don't see ICC as a solution to the problem of northern Uganda. The problem comes when ICC uses punishment as justice, which is wrong, because it will never bring people together. It will never restore the broken relationship. They will never transform the lives of the people.
Outside the north, some observers like Frank Nyakairo are less convinced.
This notion that it should be solved the Acholi way. Acholi is part of Uganda. What happened is not crimes against Acholi people, it's crimes against the country, it's crimes against humanity. And there's no way you can tell them that you can just rub them off and shrug them aside and say, we have done away with them, we've forgiven each other.
But Nyakairo does share one serious concern about the International Criminal Court, and that concerns another arrest warrant. That of the President of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, who has in the past backed the LRA.
The LRA, according to my sources, is still in contact with some elements in the Sudan army. That is very dangerous.
Renewed backing from the LRA from Khartoum would be a disaster. But that week in Gulu, hopes for peace rose with news of a possible significant development from southern Sudan.
My driver, Saeed, and I are travelling along some 300 kilometres of spectacularly bad road, heading for southern Sudan and the regional capital, Juba. Today, delegations are gathering there, and tomorrow they are travelling to a village called Rakwamba, where Joseph Kony is supposed to come out and sign for the first time in 20 years a peace deal.
The road from Gulu to Juba crosses the porous and insecure border between Sudan and Uganda, the area which would bear the brunt of any new war. The next morning, in the headquarters of the peace negotiators in the Juba Raha Hotel, there was discouraging news.
Well, today's meeting in the bush with Joseph Kony is not happening, and the South Sudanese Vice President, Riek Machar, who's also the chief negotiator in these talks, is not available for interview. However, a senior government source has told me that Joseph Kony phoned Riek Machar last night by satellite from the bush and demanded food as a condition of coming to the meeting and the signing. I'm told that the meeting has been rescheduled for the 12th of August. We shall see.
The 12th came and went, and still Kony failed to appear. For most local people, despite sporadic attacks and abductions, the relative peace is a lot better than nothing. But the rest of the world, with its eyes on stability and resources, is losing patience, and there is increasing pressure for a military solution. Henry Okello Oryem, the Ugandan Minister for International Relations, says they remain committed to a peaceful solution.
However, this cannot go on forever, and it might reach a time when the government of Uganda and the other countries in the region have to look at other options on how to continue defending and protecting the lives of the people in Uganda and those of the region.
The other option is a military one, but a military campaign means an all-out attack on an army consisting largely of kidnapped children and young people, and I have seen with my own eyes what that means. In this battle, more than 50 rebels were killed, but some were as young as 4 or 5.
Armed option is terrible, considering the children on the other side, but if the threats exist to the majority and to the hundreds and millions of people that threat exists from the LRA, then there is a duty on the government of Uganda. There's a duty to the region to make sure that the people and their property are protected.
This terrible 2-decade-old war may at last be coming to an end. But with so many factors in play, it's very difficult to see what form that end may take. The conflicting strategic interests of the West and the regime in Khartoum, the need for justice versus the desperate local desire for peace, and the rights, for they do have rights, of the child conscripts of the LRA.